one? Kashmir Action.
Kashmir Action Committee.
Yes.
I see. Yes, that's right.
Yes, we met at that time, but there's a lot of water under the bridge, as we say, since then, in all fronts. So it's an honor to meet you again. Thank you very much for receiving us. I've been expounding to your colleagues the current perceptions on the Kashmir issue in Britain. Of course, not everyone in Britain shares my view on the justness of the Kashmiri cause.
Really?
Mainly through ignorance, I think.
I see.
So we have a job to do. But some of us are busy doing it.
Well, media has, of course,
very, very big effect.
Very unfair.
Yes, and also India is very busy there.
Oh, yes.
They have recently stepped up their propaganda efforts.
So when I started moving in England about Kashmir, some of the MPs that I met, I said, I want to talk to you something about Kashmir. Do you have any background knowledge already? And yes, we know everything what has been said by India so far. That is how we started. They were absolutely right in saying something. Nobody knew anything about the other side.
No.
And then, of course, since then, it has been going on. And if he could enlist the support of media, then it would have been easier for us. But that we couldn't do.
No, that's. I fear that will always be a barrier to us.
That's
but
right.
there are ways of climbing over that barrier. And I thought I would explain to you what we're doing, your friends in Britain are doing in the next few months. Following the Prime Minister of Pakistan's visit just a few weeks ago to London, I and some of my colleagues undertook to organize a conference on Kashmir, which will be held in Glasgow in April or May, which we hope will have an international appeal and will serve the purpose of breaking through the media wall of silence on the question. It will be mainly aimed at British parliamentarians and journalists and academics and opinion formers, and we'll hope to draw speakers of note from this area. And we aim to have that around April or May, and to follow it up over a period of maybe 6 weeks with intensive work around the areas where there are major centers of Pakistani and Kashmiri population, with public meetings and rallies. And we want to culminate in something that's never been done before, and that is a mass lobby of Parliament, whereby we bring, we hope, several thousand Pakistanis and Kashmiris from all over the constituencies in Britain, on buses, coaches, trains, to London, wearing their national dress, as colourful as possible and as bright an assembly as possible. We hold a rally in Westminster Hall, and periodically people leave the rally and go to lobby their individual members of Parliament. Now, as I've been putting it, sir, in the run-up to the next general election, members of Parliament are more ready than usual to listen to their constituents. And it's our intention to try to make Kashmir an election issue in those constituencies where the vote matters, where the marginal seats are, where the MP's fate could turn on his attitude to such a question. And that throughout the whole day of that day, we would have groups going in, 15, 20 at a time, putting in what we call the green card, requesting an audience with their Member of Parliament, and putting their views strongly to the Member of Parliament and asking him to nail his colours to the mast, as it were. And I think both of these projects would dramatically increase the salience of the issue and win new converts to our position. And we start, as you put it yourself, we start from a very low base of understanding of our point of view. So we discussed this with Prime Minister Bhutto. She promised every assistance in both of these projects, and already my staff are busy on the organization of them. So I wanted to tell you directly about that and to express the wish that you'll be able to come to the conference and that you'll be able to assist us in any way possible. And indeed, you may have anticipated a point that I was going to make, which was it would be very, very effective if we could have articulate women spokeswomen, I should say, from the occupied area and from amongst the refugees, who could express the particular horror being suffered by the women folk under the occupation, and could also show to the world that there are women active and able to speak for the cause, which of course in Western countries is a very important...
to be addressing the audience there in Glasgow?
Either as speakers, or perhaps, if that's not possible, an idea I discussed today with the Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, that we have filmed interviews taken here with women, which can be broadcast to the conference, where the women folk could express their perceptions of the occupation. If I may use the word, it's a word that sounds pejorative, but in propaganda terms, this can be very effective, and we have to make use of the strongest case we have.
If it was possible to get permission for these women to travel abroad to UK, then it would not become difficult at all. But if that is not possible, the British embassy here has been not very liberal, you see, in granting visas to people affected. Once they know that other people are affected, they don't get a visa.
Well, I discussed it this afternoon, in fact, with the British High Commissioner.
I see you did.
Who's new, of course. I won't say he's a great stalwart of our point of view, but he is new, and he also knows the British political facts of life, that there will be another government along in a moment, and I would not expect any difficulty from him, and it would be viewed very poorly in the British Parliament were there to be so any difficulty in visas of people travelling specifically.
If that was possible, then the best would be to take these ladies there, you see, and present them to speak directly to the audience.
It would be, if there are no problems for you in that, it would be infinitely better for us.
For us, absolutely no problem, except this visa problem.
Well, I'm sure that we can solve that.
That we tried in the past, Lord Every
Yes.
And he wanted to take some people and present them to the House of Lords, but they didn't get the permission.
I'd be very surprised if we had a problem on that, because this is a conference which will be supported by many dozens of members of Parliament.
Are you in contact, sir, with Roger Godseff and the Kashmir
Very
Committee?
closely, and he'll be...
Because he was also planning a similar thing.
Yes, and he'll be one of the main actors in the conference and in the lobby.
And Lord Avery...
Yes, I haven't discussed it with him.
He's been very active in
Yes,
fact.
indeed.
Very, very
Indeed, he's a very fine man. And Roger Godseff, in fact, is doing a wonderful job in the House of Commons on this. No, he's thoroughly involved in these initiatives that I'm discussing with you. And
I addressed one of his selection meetings also this time when I was there.
Oh, yes? Oh, very good. Well, that's a very valuable favour.
A Pakistani gentleman is trying to contest.
Against him, yes.
Yes, against him.
Yes.
And, I think he's now feeling comfortable after I had to this constituency.
Good. Well, this is happening in more than one constituency.
Yes.
Where, of course, it's a very important project to get Pakistani British members of Parliament. Indeed, one of our closest friends is about to become one in Glasgow, Mohammed Sarwar. But he's not putting out of the House a stalwart of the Pakistani and Kashmiri cause. But to put Roger Godseff out of the House would be to do that.
Yes.
And indeed it's virtually happened in Bradford with Max Madden, who has been forced into retirement at the age of 55. He has announced that he's not standing again.
When did he do that?
About 6 months ago.
6 months ago. Nobody told me about the next
Yes. He announced his retirement because no less than 2 Pakistanis are putting him out.
I wish I knew that.
Prime Minister Bhutto raised it when she was in London because she expressed her disapproval of it too. Max Madden's been one of the champions of the cause for 2 decades. And for him to be put out of Parliament by a Pakistani brother is incongruous, to say the least.
And they can't replace him no matter who he is.
No. Well, indeed, both of them are cutting each other's throats. They can't agree which. They couldn't agree on one candidate, so there's 2 standing against them. It's not good at all. But anyway, that's a digression. But yes, Roger is completely involved in this initiative. And I must say the Pakistan High Commission have been extremely helpful in the early stages, and I expect them to continue to be so. And when I see the Prime Minister Bhutto in a few days' time, I shall give her the report I've just given you of what stage we're at in organising these things. So we'll be in touch.
So the other matter which I feel you would be confronted with is having us with all this support. Still, I read a letter by the former Labour leader. He addressed it to me, as a matter of fact. I wrote to him and he sent me a reply, and then I know the views of the Conservative government. Both of them had the same view about Kashmir. There's no differences here. Which means, from my assessment, the official policy of the British government, it will take quite a lot of exercise to bring about any worthwhile change in the policy towards Kashmir. There's relationship with India and the consideration, economic consideration, other global political considerations, and then the past track record of one-sided leaning towards India and all that. Put together, you would be facing quite a difficult situation.
Well, sir, we now have a new Shadow Foreign Secretary, whose name is Robin Cook. He's a very close friend of mine. He has no track record on this question at all.
I see.
So he has an open mind on it. But as I put it to other colleagues today, he has a razor-sharp mind. So it might be open, but it has to be filled on the basis of the clearest logic and the most powerful political case. And I believe it's possible for us to win that argument for his mind. His predecessor, who was briefly in place, had no real policy on the question, but his predecessor, Gerald Kaufman, made some very strong statements.
Yes,
very strong.
He went to Sardar way back.
He did.
He made a very irritating statement from the Indian side.
He did.
They didn't like it.
His policy statements still stand. They remain the Labour Party's point of view on the issue. So if was it from John Smith, the late John Smith, the letter that you received?
No.
Or from Neil Kinnock?
Neil Kinnock.
Ah, yes. Well, of course, Gerald's statements were made subsequent to that. No, they weren't. You're right. They were contemporaneous. His statements, and I ascertained this, Gerald Kaufman's statements remain the position of the Labour Party, which makes them, I think, more proactive and more progressive from our point of view than the government's. Even the British government's statements are, their policy, it's not too bad. The problem is they don't do anything to bring their policy about. It's all very well saying you're in favour of United Nations resolutions and self-determination, but if you do nothing to bring it about, then you're as guilty as those who say they don't.
I always thought somehow or the other that the British politicians in the Commonwealth could have played a more effective role as a conciliatory role, as a matter of fact. I'm not advocating an attack on India outright, you see, and defeating India and knocking it out of the arena. That's not a thing that I'm suggesting. Because this has a lot to do with the region, the whole region, you see, has repercussions. But they could still sit in the Commonwealth and bring about and address some of the problems which can be addressed at one time. And that way, in fact, I've been suggesting to the congressmen in America also that instead of sending fact-finding missions, they send goodwill missions across to Kashmir, to India, and to Pakistan. And that way, try to pacify the situation in the first instance, and then make it possible to make any progress on it. Otherwise, sticking to their positions all the time will not make any headway. Similarly, in the Commonwealth, you have a very fine opportunity that could be utilized for bringing about some sort of conciliation, understanding. And I suggested for that, for the same purpose, meeting of the Kashmiri recognized leadership from both sides. Because then both sides, India and Pakistan, must certainly be looking for some face and some way out, which are very badly committed together these. And this time in the OIC, I think it was the intercession by the United States. They must have played some role. I have no direct knowledge. That's what I guess. It was possible to have Kashmiris from, not all of them, but some of them. It's very small, but two from that side, two from this side. It's a good beginning. It's a breakthrough, and I have recognized this act of India also as a gesture of goodwill. So this could be pursued, this could be followed. Yes. And I've been asking Roger Gorsef to look for an arrangement like this, where through under his agency you could bring about the Kashmiris from outside and make them sit together in Ukraine and somewhere, and without any publicity fanfare, they just try to find out what is possible that could be done. So that way it might be.
That's a constructive way forward. I was explaining earlier, one of the platforms I'm advancing inside the party is that a Labour government in Britain should push for the establishment of an eminent persons group inside the Commonwealth to play, if you like, the pre-negotiation role of in the way that they did in the South Africa situation. And this might be easier for India to accept, given their posture that Kashmir is an internal question. Well, at least it's in the Commonwealth family. Now, I believe there's some prospects of success in advancing that way forward, and intend to continue to push it. And it has support on both sides in the British Parliament. And the Commonwealth, it's looking for something to do. It's looking for now that South Africa is free, it's looking for a role to play. And the British ought to be looking for a role to play, a positive role to play in the area too. So I'm not pessimistic about that as an approach. And we'll continue to advance it. And it's one of the things that we would discuss at this conference in Glasgow that I'm talking about.
Anything that we can do, any contribution that we can make to this project.
I'm grateful. Of course, we'll correspond with you properly in due course. But we have a mountain to climb. There's no doubt about that. A lot of world factors are operating against us.
Yes.
The debacle in former Yugoslavia chills the blood of anyone in the West when one talks about redrawing boundaries and countries yielding territories and all of that. Of course, we know the answer to that, but it is a mountain, and it is part of the ploy of our opposition in this to caricature the Kashmir issue as one of Islamic zealotry. And again, the examples of Algiers and the negative picture which is painted in the West about Islam.
Sir, Kashmir has been a unique exception in the sense that all over the subcontinent, there have been killings on both sides, Muslims and non-Muslims. But it is Kashmir where there has never been an ethnic problem at all throughout the centuries. People still, if they're allowed to live, they're still with amity and friendship with each other. They look after each other. Therefore, that has never been, of course, through propaganda machine has been brought about, but otherwise, Kashmiris have been very peaceful.
It's true, and it's the failure to deal with this question continuously which has radicalized and brutalized the whole situation.
Yes.
They have themselves to blame insofar as any of these things are even half true.
That's right.
But I was explaining before you came in, it's one of their ploys to paint Kashmir as a sort of mini Afghanistan in the making. That if the Indians withdraw, the factions will murder each other quite apart from what they'll do to other people. So this is another mountain that we have to climb. And we have to be, I think, sophisticated about our propaganda approach to these issues.
There are possibilities of all kinds in with regard to Kashmir. This is a multi-dimensional issue. It's not one simple thing. But the Kashmiris themselves, we as Kashmiris, we are trying to address many of these intricate problems, which are almost mostly internal. We're trying to address them and deal with them. And I hope in the passage of time we should be able to sort of explain the propaganda, the anti-propaganda, try to bring about a situation which does not pose any further threat to the regional peace and to the subcontinent itself. It is sitting in a time bomb, in fact, the Kashmir situation, both for India and Pakistan. And the Kashmiris certainly can play a role conducive to a situation where things could be addressed.
In my conversation today with the British High Commissioner, and I'm certainly not quoting him, but I think I'm paraphrasing him correctly, that, albeit at horrendous cost in human rights and military cost, that the Indians had managed to stabilize the situation in the occupied territory. Is that your perception also?
So what has actually happened is that the quantity of resistance has reduced, but the quality is increasing. Now that's a very, very delicate thing to know. It's not easy to find it. But this is one. Number two is, I mean, previously in the beginning we see one Indian soldier killed for 50, 60, 40, 30 freedom fighters. Today, the ratio is reversing gradually. Somewhere it is at par, somewhere the more Indian soldiers are killed and less Kashmiris are killed. So like that it's improving. Secondly, the involvement, which is a very dangerous element, which at the moment the world, the people in the world do not appreciate and realize, is that the involvement in the area is growing, although it's a very slow pace, but it is growing. The people from Azad Kashmir trickling out, people from Pakistan, individuals without anybody holding any responsibility for them, from different provinces, they're trickling out and joining the freedom fight. And some people, though a handful in numbers, across the world, from Muslim countries, trickling in, people from Afghanistan going in. So if this goes on for some more time, then the quality and quantity of operation will both increase, confronting the Indian army very severely to take more drastic action. That drastic action could be nothing short of attacking Azad Kashmir. They tried to do it twice before, but somehow some good counsel prevailed and they stopped it. That could be one possibility. They attack Azad Kashmir. Attacking Azad Kashmir would invariably lead to much bigger conflagration than it is. So like that, see, it is snowballing, though very slow, but it is snowballing on both sides. The Indians know this fact, but apparently, they give the impression that they are containing the situation and trying to hold elections, but elections will never be held. I don't think elections can be held.
Well, I was going to ask you about that next. Yeah.
The British High Commission here and the American embassy people, they've been visiting us, and my inference from their conversation was that they are in favor of having the election held. And then, of course, some impossibility that after the elections are held, then the Kashmir is free to choose. But the very fact that elections cannot be held, as far as we know, things certain so far, that remains there. That elections cannot be held. But the international opinion of these two countries has been inclined towards having the elections go on.
Although with safeguards, the British High Commissioner was surprisingly firm on this question in his conversation with me today, that international supervision, not just of the polling, but for a considerable period before the polling, including the registration period.
That we suggested from here.
Yes.
That under three conditions. One, the troops should be withdrawn. I didn't say entirely, but I said from the population centers. They should be withdrawn from the population centers. And number two was they should be internationally supervised. And number three is that the Kashmiris are not required to sign an oath of allegiance to the Indian Constitution. Well, in fact, it's a requirement of the procedural rules, but not of the Constitution itself. So that was also discussed with the British High Commissioner.
Yes.
And
he was less firm on that point.
If these three conditions are met, it's properly supervised. It's not just seen from distance, but they go through the electoral rolls and election commission and the whole exercise. If that is done, then perhaps it will be possible to pacify the situation and hold elections.
Yeah, I'm sure it's wise to be open-minded on that question to that extent.
Yes.
For fear of sending the message that, we were somehow afraid of elections. In fact, India has every reason to fear a free, proper election, for they would undoubtedly lose it, and lose it very heavily.
Yes.
And of the three conditions that you advance, it seems to me that these are no more than the demands made in many, many places, and which the international community has accepted. If you take, for example, something which I've been involved recently, the organization of the referendum in the Sahara between Polisario and Morocco.
Yes.
The demand that the Moroccan army should be withdrawn to barracks has been agreed by Morocco. That international UN supervision should exist throughout the process, from registration to voting, has been conceded by Morocco. So there's nothing unusual about those demands. The question of the oath, the British High Commissioner was a little more, you might say, flexible. He took the view that there are people, indeed I joke, there are members of the British Parliament who take an oath of allegiance to Her Majesty in order to get their salary, when they don't really mean it. And it's possible, I suppose, to cross your fingers and or say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim under your breath as you're taking the oath. And it's possible that perhaps this could be surmounted. This was a view that we discussed.
So the fear
today.
is, what we Kashmiris fear is that once the Kashmiris accept the election like this, then maybe the world community takes it as a fait accompli and decides in favor of India. So that is why we're trying to safeguard against any such possibility. Had that not been there, then perhaps to hold elections was a normal process, and there was no possibility of any rigging or anything of that sort, international supervision.
Well, it's useful to us insofar as it introduces movement into the situation.
Yes.
But if it's handled wrongly, and if India comes out of it with a propaganda gain, then obviously that would set the cause back.
Yes.
So, but I do think it's a tactical question rather than a question of principle. There is no, it seems to me, principle involved in whether or not to agree to go forward to elections. It's a question of weighing up whose tactical advantage is advanced by going ahead or not. But anyway, it's academic, I think, because the April date would appear to have disappeared into the mists.
No.
And
Even the next April is far off.
Indeed. So it's not something that needs to occupy us immediately. And it's not something that the Indians are shouting about.
So that nobody seems to be taking any responsibility. That everybody is suggesting things. Once the Kashmiris were sure that there was somebody that they could hold responsible for, then I think the situation would pacify.
Yes.
It would not be difficult to do it.
Yes.
Nobody really wants a fight on that soil. But they're forced into a situation where there's no way back. Today, if the Kashmiris want to compromise, they just cannot do it.
Yeah.
They will do it at the cost of their very existence. So they have nothing left except to go on fighting. But if there was a situation where something would be done, I think the Kashmiris would avoid fighting and try to settle this politically. They're basically political-minded people. They were forced to take up a gun.
Yes. What's the view of the government of Azad Kashmir on the so-called third option question?
So our view, I personally, I have said so many times, and I explained to many people, like doctors and others, that the third option, as far as we are concerned, is not available to us. For the first time, the person who approached this with me was Mr. Stephen Solas. He came 3 years back. Came with 2 suggestions. One was to have elections supervised by the United States to make sure that they were fair elections, and then give the Kashmiris an opportunity to decide. So then I said to him plainly, I said, this would mean that the Kashmiris who had rejected the election, boycott election in 89, I should now in 90 request them to accept election and take an oath of allegiance under the Indian Constitution and go back on everything what has happened in 1 year. I said that will not be possible. And he agreed. The second thing he said, why not go for a third option? So I said to Mr. Flores, what do you exactly mean by a third option? Is it 84,000 square miles of area? That means the whole territory in Jammu and Kashmir. But he said, no, that's not possible because India will not give up the Hindu majority area. I said, let us concede the Hindu majority area. What about the rest? Is that going to become sovereign, independent state? He said, if you give something to India, then you will have to concede something to Pakistan also, in the pact. Northern area and Azad Kashmir or northern area, one of the two or both. I said, all right, conceded. Then what about the rest? Well, he said, the difficulty is that India will say that there are 600 other states, 566 states who will be wanting independence, and India would break up if that happens. I said, Mr. Roller, what are we discussing about? We're wasting time. What do you suggest ultimately? He said, is it not possible to have both the flags fly on synonym? I said, is it for that? There seems silly thing that the people are laying down their lives in these numbers. So, and this is the concept of third option, which has been, in fact, when you talk of independent Kashmir, they think of their own, making in the Kashmir of their own making of 84,000 square miles of area, Hindus, Muslims living together. But at their heart, they have a totally different conception of an independent Kashmir. So that was I explained to them. And then I said, as far as we are concerned, sir, if we make any departure of any nature from a given accepted position, then it gives India clearly a handle to beat us with and say, off the hook. So we cannot afford to do that. But if India was prepared to discuss it, or if somebody with responsibility, I said to Suraj, do you take the responsibility? He said, how can I? I said, is it the United States? He said, no, I don't hold peace for them. I said, is it India who suggested? He said, no, India has not suggested anything. I said, then what are you discussing with us? Yes. How can we give up our internationally accepted position?
Do you think that the Indians somehow like to throw this option into the pot, as it were, to cause some division? Because it does cause division,
yes, it does cause division. Sir, this is exactly I was going to say. This is what they're trying to do just at the moment. At the moment, they're trying to sell this idea here, on this side of the ceasefire line. This is Chile's, I don't know whether you...
Yes, I like it.
And they are selling this idea to us here.
Thank you.
But at home, they immediately turn around and say, that, are you suggesting a breakup of India in so many hundred states?
Yes.
They don't listen to it. But to us here, they sell this idea.
They like to throw it into
yes,
the...
so that they cause division.
Yeah.
You know.
That's my perception.
This is exactly what they're trying.
Yeah. That's my perception, really. But it does cause problems in the community in Britain, certainly.
More in Britain than elsewhere.
Really?
Yes.
I mean, when His Excellency Mr. Khan came to Britain a few months ago, a year ago or so, with his delegation to talk about the Kashmir issue, the meeting was boycotted by a number of prominent activists. And indeed, they tried. I was speaking at the meeting. They tried to get me to not to go, to snub the man. It was ridiculous, but it was very hot, you know. It caused a lot of trouble.
The problem is, if India was prepared to grant independence to the Kashmiris, let them do it. We're not going to stop them.
No.
How can we stop them?
Exactly.
But they're suggesting to us that we should go and struggle now for another 50 years for independent Kashmir with all the world community against us, that we want to break up India.
That's right. That's right. No, it's a much more difficult case to win internationally.
Yes, that's right.
For independence. Because the Yugoslavia example is the one that will be thrown in our face.
Yes. And some other problem which has cropped up very recently is that the United Nations, the United States and Europe, they are scared of creating new states. The word right of self-determination, in fact, has become a scare now for the people, because they don't want many states to be created.
Well, it was during the Cold War, it was their banner.
It was their banner, yes. You're right.
But they always wanted to pick and choose about self-determination.
Yes.
My wife is Palestinian from Jerusalem.
Oh, I see.
For 40 years they talked about self-determination.
I see.
Except so far as the Palestinians were concerned. So they've always had a double standard so far as that's concerned.
Yes.
And look at what's happening in Chechnya this evening.
Yes.
Is there any prospect of a different government in India taking a different... I mean, is the current government probably the best one that we're likely to ever get? Seems that way to me,
The future does not really offer a very happy prospect in Indian politics. Maybe the Congress is not able to form government as a single party, but if at all it comes to power, it comes to a coalition of 2-3 parties together. And then there's no single party which is any more national in that sense. 3-4 provinces here, 2 provinces there, like that. And that could pose a very serious problem for us also.
So the ministers resigning in Rao's government is potentially a cause for sadness in that sense. When is the Indian election due, the general?
Next year.
Is it next year?
I think Rao's son is also not deep in the state family.
That's right.
In
In the
the by-election.
by-election,
There's been a prejudice of the North ruling all the time in 2,500 years, except for once Mr. Rao from the South came to Delhi. And they have not digested him, so they have not accepted him.
No. He's quite a wily Prime Minister, I think. And they've sent a man to London now as the High Commissioner who's Also a very clever chap. Very political, very sharp.
And Sangvi.
Yes. He's acting on his Labour Party contacts very effectively. Playing the Congress card, you know.
He's a learned man.
He is. So there's an increase in the quality of their work.
Yes.
But also Pakistan now has a new High Commissioner who is also a very politically sophisticated man. And so they're worthy adversaries.
We have some advantage in the American elections, Republicans winning and except for one or two seats. All of the seats that were supported by Indian side, they lost the election.
Is that a fact?
Yes, almost all of them, except for one or two seats. And the Republicans have been people who got elected. They have been very favorably inclined towards our side, especially in Pakistan.
Well, that's odd because the new house, they were dancing in the streets of Tel Aviv about the new house because they had immeasurably strengthened the pro-Israel forces in the Congress. So it's interesting that the same house takes a different perspective on this part of the world. But they eliminated, the Jewish lobby eliminated significant numbers of even-handed people.
Yes, he has he become the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee?
I think so. I
He
think he has, yes.
No, he was a very, very vocal, outspoken man far as we are concerned.
On your behalf?
Yes.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Well, that must be the only progressive cause in the whole world that he supports. I'm saying that must be the only progressive cause in the entire world that he supports. $2.7 million as an advance on a book that he was going to write and lay out the new right agenda. And there was enormous criticism, including from inside his own party, partly for opportunistic reasons, because Bob Dole is obviously seeking the same position that Gingrich is. And he, amongst others, called on him to hand the money back. It was wrong to... because Murdoch has a number of cases in front of the federal government at the minute in terms of ownership of television stations and so on. So he's now backed down and said he won't take the 2.7 million, I think it was, advance. He will accept $1 advance, and he will take royalties on the sale of the book, which of course will probably net the same amount of money. But this has been seen as a climb down by him. But he's very much the man with the wind in his sails immediately after the midterm elections. Does he have a point of view on Kashmir?
I didn't hear anything about from him.
No. I don't think foreign policy is very much his game. And what about Clinton? Has he indicated anything?
Some of the people close to him have been very enthusiastic about his point of view, and they're quite confident that he certainly try to do whatever he can. His statement, the first statement that was made by him last year on Kashmir was very encouraging. Very clear, categorical statement. It's a dispute and it has to be resolved. Respect the views of Kashmir. All those basic things he spelled out.
Yes.
But then gradually the pressure mounted on him and he started coming down.
Well, there's a lot of money in there. There's tremendous growth in Western investment in India.
Yeah.
It's seen as a really huge and important market.
But something goes wrong with the integrity of India. Then this money, I don't know how are they going to account for this money.
Yes. Yes, I mean that's our answer, isn't it? That it's not as if we go away, there will be peace and tranquility in India, and that the Kashmiris will lie down and accept it. This is now reaching critical mass in the territory of Kashmir itself. Whether Pakistan supports it or not, whether we have a conference in Britain or not, whether anyone does anything or not, it's an indigenous cause that won't go away. And it's in India's own interest to resolve it before it infects as an issue the whole country.
I'm afraid that maybe by the time Indians get ready to resolve it, there will be no use resolving it at all. Because it will have caught up with other such dimensions that will be under nobody's control. If this indigenous infiltration, as I said, if it continues, and we have no control over them, no control whatsoever, nobody's controlling them at all, neither the APHC nor anybody else, then you never know whom they are really representing and who they are fighting for, who is supporting them, and why, what is the purpose behind it. So that makes things
Yes, that's right.
still very worse.
That's right.
One of the paradoxical developments that has taken shape very recently is that India was elevated as the chairman of the UN Human Rights Committee. On one side, the American State Department and different human rights organizations, accredited human rights organizations, said about India that they are the worst of the worst violators of human rights. So crowning them with the chairmanship of the UN Human Rights Committee, I find is one of the paradoxes of our history. And this needs attention of the international community. I think